Windows in every building have stories to tell. They're a thin line between us and something personal, hidden. My neighbor, Mrs. Vera Caldwell, loved me like a daughter, even though she had her own son, Billy, who rarely went outside because of his disability. He had Down syndrome, and local children often mocked and bullied him in ways that sometimes frightened me. His most devoted friends were me and his toy bear, the one that would wave its paws and emit a growl when wound up. Her apartment was right behind my bedroom wall. Mrs. Caldwell often, but gently, scolded Billy for small things, spreading his toys around, spilling water. Overall, she was a very kind woman. Her husband had died in an industrial accident, but the factory he worked for paid for the funeral and even continued to support her financially, as he was one of their proudest workers. In all the years I've lived here, I don't remember ever hearing her complain or say she needed something, especially given the circumstances. Mrs. Caldwell often treated me to homemade muffins and brought berries from their summer cabin in Vermont, where she and Billy spent nearly the whole summer. On my birthday, she even gave me money to help pay for braces. I hugged her then. Braces were a big deal to me. During my school years, walking home, I would look at her apartment window facing the courtyard. There, Billy often waited for me, waving his arms and jumping, and it was funny to see the kindest person I knew so excited to see me. When I stood fumbling at my door, Mrs. Caldwell would hurry down the stairs, inviting me in for lunch or dinner. I always thought she made it her mission to feed anyone, be it me or another neighbor. I was 16 when I started college in another city. I moved into a dorm, but returned home periodically and always saw Billy in her window, waiting with a timetable his mother had given him. To keep him company, I once bought him a xylophone at a local music store. I loved its chime. It felt a bit magical. Billy was thrilled and in return gave me his bear, though it no longer growled or waved because it was broken inside. Before one of my departures, Mrs. Caldwell cooked a rich dinner and insisted I stay. Fortunately, I didn't have other plans, so I agreed. Despite her age and life situation, she kept her apartment organized. It wasn't just dinner, it was a feast you'd expect on New Year's Eve. It was remarkable she went to such lengths for an ordinary meal. We sat down, ate, talked. Billy played the xylophone and even attempted to sing. As I was about to leave, Mrs. Caldwell packed food for my dorm so I'd have something to eat later. We said goodbye, and the next day I headed back to school. I decided to leave Billy's bear in my dorm room. Along with my textbooks and some clothes, I had 2 food bags I barely dragged to the station, almost missing the train. Academic life swallowed me like quicksand. Tests and projects piled up, so I postponed my next trip home to focus on studies. If you want peace, keep your grade debts low. My hard work paid off. Our group won the opportunity to spend a week in Washington, D.C., for a collegiate exhibition where schools competed academically. I dreamed of countless tours, dozens of photos by the Capitol and other sites, but everything fell apart. First, I somehow fell ill. I don't know what, since the rest of the group ate the same things. Then I slept terribly. I couldn't remember my dreams, except at the trip's end when I woke from one where Billy's toy bear kept waving, growling, and looming like it was alive. We returned from D.C. late at night. A classmate drove me to Portland, where I hadn't been in 6 weeks. I walked to my building like I was in a daze, too tired even to look at Billy waiting in his window. Once inside, I barely took off my clothes before collapsing into bed. When I woke next, I was sick and there was the smell of burnt paper in the room. I opened the window and went into the hallway to retrieve my suitcase. As soon as I left the room, a chill ran down my spine. Billy's toy bear stood by the door. Every horror movie I'd watched flooded my mind. I turned on every light. It was early fall, so dark, but that soothed me slightly. I locked the bear in a closet. After unpacking the things I didn't use from D.C., I decided to take a walk. The street was deserted. In autumn, everyone rushes home where it's warm and cozy. Mrs. Caldwell's apartment lights were off. Maybe they were in bed or watching TV. As I walked back toward my building, I glanced at her window again. Through the thin lace curtain, I saw her figure in a nightgown. I couldn't make out her face. She stood, watching, maybe me, maybe something else, but she definitely didn't want to be seen. When I entered the building and climbed to my floor, I distinctly heard Mrs. Caldwell outside her door, breathing loudly and looking through the peephole. It seemed strange. Before, if I came home late, she would always ope in the door and chat politely about my studies. Once inside, I took a sedative and showered, letting the hot water and music wash away the stress of recent days. I lay down to sleep, but the burnt paper smell lingered, though weaker. I turned off the lights, eager to fall asleep. A soft chime resonated from the xylophone behind the wall. I sighed and reached for my headphones. Another gently echoing xylophone tone. I heard Billy's toy, then Mrs. Caldwell's muffled laughter. Again the xylophone rang, and this time I heard her mumble indistinct words, not scolding him but chanting. I got up, pressed my ear to the wall. Silence. Then a loud, resonant chime from the xylophone made me jump, a sound so sharp it seemed as though she knew someone was listening. She laughed again, and something rattled strangely. I put on my headphones and dozed off. Apparently the sedative won. I slept better than in days. Morning came slowly. I wasn't in a rush, though I planned to print study materials, shop for groceries, call my parents, and make meals for the next few days off school. At the grocery store, I ran into Aunt Marcia. She seemed glad just to see me, since Mrs. Caldwell had disappeared. I mentioned Mrs. Caldwell liked bulk markets to save money, but Marcia shrugged. I decided to pick up extra fruit for Mrs. Caldwell and Billy and update her on my Washington trip. With my coursework printed and bags full, I headed home. The courtyard was empty as usual. Nowadays, kids are glued to devices rather than running outside for real-world adventures. Maybe time kills that impulse. At last, I saw her window again. The thin lace curtain was drawn, as always. And no Billy, he loved to draw by the window. Juggling bags and the door key, I entered the building. Carrying them was awkward. I knocked on Mrs. Caldwell's door, then tried my own, anxious to drop the bags that cut into my fingers. After dropping everything in my hallway, I heard shuffling. Mrs. Caldwell coming to her door, fumbling with it, pushing, hitting the lock in her effort to open it. "Mrs. Caldwell, are you okay?" I asked. She stopped and began breathing heavily, right against her door. I was utterly confused. Had she fallen ill? It reminded me of a strange night before, when she asked me to hang the bag on her doorknob to avoid contact in case she was contagious. I hung the bag and told her, then entered my apartment, glancing back at her door. But it didn't open. I started cooking to distract myself. My friend was video calling, telling me about her love life and a recipe. After dinner, I checked her door again through the peephole. The bag was still hanging on the knob. I decided it could stay until I felt like taking it in to refrigerate. With headphones on and tea in hand, I began watching a show. After a few episodes, I realized it was late and decided to retrieve the bag. I peered through the peephole. My blood ran cold. Her apartment door was open, the bag torn, its contents scattered across the floor of the corridor. Mrs. Caldwell was nowhere to be seen, but I heard something being dragged up the stairs to our floor. The power went out due to ongoing construction nearby. The entire building was dark. It felt like a horror cliché, but I actually felt slightly calmer knowing I was inside my apartment, at least temporarily safe. I listened. I could hear Mrs. Caldwell dragging something. Then I heard a door slam on our floor, a noise she'd never made before. An intense, sour smell overwhelmed me. I grabbed my phone's flashlight and an air freshener, spraying frantically and trying not to vomit. I went to the bathroom and washed my face to steady myself. The flashlight helped me find my toothpaste. Then I took another sedative and went to bed, deciding that tomorrow I would do something about her. Billy might need help. As I laid down, I heard a sudden crash in her apartment next door. Normally, I'd be terrified, but I figured it was just a shelf collapsing. Still, I went to turn the lights on. They snapped on, and in that light I walked confidently into her apartment. The shelf was in place. The closet door, however, stood wide open. On the floor among her belongings sat Billy's stuffed bear, the one I'd put away in the closet. Then through the wall came the xylophone's eerie tone, the one I once found charming. Again, that unsettling xylophone tone. I tried to think what to do next. then decided to turn on every lamp and stay up until morning, planning to leave as soon as I could. Like an animal cornered, I sat in my room, listening to whatever was happening next door. Mrs. Caldwell's mumbling and that dreadful toy. I tried to distract myself, but paranoia made every little noise snap me to attention. I may have dozed off, but I kept waking to her unintelligible muttering and the xylophone's tone. Morning brought rain. I was relieved to leave my apartment and check the corridor where the bag remains lay trampled, probably by Mr. S. Caldwell herself. The bag was gone, maybe she took it. Outside, I felt safer than inside. Upstairs, not a light in her window. My phone showed 6:00 a.m. The parking lot was almost empty as people left for work. I bought coffee and returned, watching her window. At 7 a.m., Mrs. Caldwell always appeared to check the thermometer hanging outside. A car honked leaving the lot. I glanced away for a moment and then saw Billy in the window. I felt joy welling up, even laughed and waved. But he just watched. He seemed different, calm. His facial features looked older, like he'd grown up overnight. He gave me a sad smile and walked away. I sprinted into the building, up to the second floor, pounding and ringing her doorbell. I heard shuffling. Mrs. Caldwell approached and stopped at the door. "Mrs. Caldwell, please open," I called. Then from behind the door, I heard a soft xylophone tone. "What happened to you?" I cried. Another xylophone tone followed. She fumbled with the lock. A horrific stench seeped out through the cracks and into the hall. I backed down the stairs a bit, prepping for the worst. She struggled to open it. Something as simple as a door was suddenly frightening. First, I heard a sharp snap, one of two. I crouched lower and started recording on my phone, in case I needed proof for police. Then another snap, and the door slowly opened. What I saw made me press my hand to my mouth. There stood Mrs. Caldwell in a filthy, torn nightgown smeared with dried blood and patches of crusted pus. Her hair was matted, bits of food stuck in it. Her legs smeared with soot and blood. Her belly protruded. She grinned with gaping gums, missing all teeth. She raised the xylophone in one hand and the mallet in the other, striking it rashly. One mournful xylophone tone. Then another tone. I fled screaming into the street, dialing the police as I ran. The officers arrived about 10 minutes later. They watched my video before entering. They called for backup, then forced the door open. The smell hit everyone hard. People nearby blocked their noses. They found Mrs. Caldwell inside. She offered no resistance. In fact, she seemed to enjoy it. Medics followed in, calling for a stretcher. I tried to walk in, but a rescue worker pulled me back. Upstairs, Aunt Marcia met me, shielding me in a hug, knowing something terrible had happened. The police and paramedics asked me to recount everything. I described her strange behavior, Billy at the window. At the mention of her son, the responders exchanged glances. "Billy died 3 weeks ago," one said. I was stunned. I'd seen him less than an hour ago. "I'm sorry," he said gently. She never notified services. She continued caring for and feeding him. His body was surrounded by food. She masked the stench with bleach and by burning paper. They transferred Mrs. Caldwell to a psychiatric facility with no release permitted. She died there soon after. Billy was buried next to his father. On his gravestone, a stuffed bear was placed a year ago. A lawyer later contacted me. Mrs. Caldwell had left me her apartment in a will, asking me to care for her only son. But there was no one left to care for. I never moved in. I rented it out, but tenants often moved out, complaining of faint echoing xylophone tones that were never found in the apartment. Years have passed, but every time I walk by that courtyard, my skin crawls when I glance at her window. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel. I release new creepy tales regularly and they only get scarier. Don't miss out.